The story of the Allied war in the shadows begins not with armies on the march, but with a small room deep inside London's Baker Street headquarters, home of the Special Operations Executive. In early 1942, while Britain fought desperately across the globe, a lesser-known division within the WWII quietly formed a cell tasked with missions that could never be acknowledged. They operated outside standard espionage doctrine, beyond conventional sabotage, and often without clear lines of accountability. What they produced, fragmentary records labeled Remorse, Cloak, and Benefice, remain some of the most obscure Allied paperwork ever sealed after the war. The cell was unofficially referred to as Section D/Shadow, named for its predecessor that once experimented with irregular warfare. Their objective was simple in wording, yet nearly impossible in execution: conduct deniable operations across occupied Europe in ways that could not be traced back to the British government. They recruited linguists, bankers, smugglers, and soldiers who understood the value of silence. One WWII officer later wrote in his diary, "These were not the men who asked where the line was. They asked how far past it they must go." The struggle facing Section D/Shadow was immense. By 1942, Nazi control over Western Europe had solidified into a web of garrisons, informants, Gestapo stations, and rail choke points. Moving agents, forged currency, or contraband through this network required a level of organization bordering on the criminal underworld. One of the cell's earliest undertakings, Operation Remorse, used financial manipulation to destabilize enemy supply networks in Asia. It involved the quiet movement of millions in counterfeit currency, precious stones, and illicit trade through neutral ports. The operation succeeded, but the methods employed were so legally ambiguous that most details were locked away for decades. Nor was Europe any easier. The cell oversaw micro-teams inserted into France and the Low Countries using RAF Lysanders, navigating by moonlight to land in makeshift fields no larger than a tennis court. The pilots of No. 161 Squadron risked everything for each pickup and drop. Crews recalled nights where agents arrived late or the reception committee simply never appeared, forcing them to lift off again, their human cargo missing, their fate unknowable. Historical insight into the cell's mindset comes from a memo dated June 1942, written by WWII strategist Brigadier Colin Gubbins. Conventional action produces conventional results. What is needed is disruption of the enemy's confidence in the very fabric of his own control. The cell took this philosophy seriously. They targeted not just infrastructure, but psychological fault lines, black market networks, rumor chains, industrial bottlenecks, and the loyalties of mid-level collaborators. When intelligence indicated a German supply officer in Lille was skimming rations, the cell quietly increased the scale of the theft by forging papers in his name. Weeks later, he fled, pursued by his own superiors. Yet much remains unclear. Several early Remorse extensions, as described in marginal notes, have no surviving primary documentation at all. Their operational files list departures, but no completions. One infamous incident involves a three-man team dropped into eastern Belgium in November 1942. Their directive: map rail movements and identify corrupt local administrators. Their radio signals ceased within a week. German records do not mention any capture in that region, leaving historians puzzled. The men simply vanished, leaving only a final encoded message: market holds. Further obscurity required. No one has ever fully decoded its meaning. The deeper researchers dig into the cell, the more contradictions appear. Receipts suggest one team purchased explosives in Lisbon months before any corresponding mission was approved. Another file references a planned infiltration into Czechoslovakia using forged Red Cross papers, but all related documents were removed from the archive sometime in the 1950s. Even the personnel lists remain inconsistent, with several names appearing only once before disappearing from wartime rosters. These gaps raise questions about intent. Were these missions lost, erased for security, or removed to protect individuals whose actions stretch the boundaries of wartime legality? Modern historians studying the declassified fragments note that the cell's operations blurred the line between espionage and unofficial warfare. What little is known suggests the Allies were willing to risk diplomatic fallout, moral ambiguity, and the safety of their own agents to destabilize the Axis from within. For today's intelligence community, the lessons are clear. Influence, misdirection, and deniability often shape outcomes more than direct confrontation. Yet such operations leave scars, people unaccounted for, actions unrecorded, and truths deliberately concealed. As 1943 approached, the pressure on Section D/Shadow intensified. Their successes made them valuable, but their risks made them dangerous. And this is where the Americans entered the picture, eager, untested, and ready to join the war in the shadows. The result would be one of the most enigmatic Anglo-American collaborations of the entire conflict, setting the stage for disappearances and mysteries that persist to this day. In the summer of 1943, while the world's attention turned toward the Allied invasion of Sicily, an entirely different campaign unfolded in the mountains and forests of the Balkans. It was a war with no front lines, fought by small detachments of the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, men who had volunteered for missions so covert that many briefings were delivered verbally to avoid paper trails. Among the most obscure of these units was OSS Detachment 101, European Extension, tasked with supporting resistance fighters, mapping German troop locations, and sabotaging key transport routes. Their work was essential, yet officially, they were scarcely acknowledged. The struggle began the moment the teams left friendly soil. Insertions were conducted at night by RAF Special Duties aircraft, usually Halifax or Liberator bombers modified to carry containers and parachutists. Agents jumped into terrain they had only studied on crude maps, dense forests in Yugoslavia, limestone ridges in Albania, and remote valleys in northern Greece. Bad weather, inaccurate intelligence, or simply the chaos of occupied territory meant that many teams landed miles from their intended zones. Team Foxhound, a four-man Anglo-American unit dropped into Montenegro in August 1943, encountered these difficulties immediately. Their reception committee, part of the partisans, never arrived. For 3 tense days, they hid in a ravine while German patrols combed the area. Their wireless operator, Sergeant William Halpern, later recorded in his field diary, "We heard dogs at night. Not strays, trackers. We stayed awake with fingers on safeties." Foxhound eventually linked with the partisans, but the delay cost them precious time and exposed them to significant danger. Meanwhile, OSS leadership in Cairo and Bari struggled to maintain reliable communications with the growing number of detachments scattered across the Balkans. The enemy controlled major rail hubs in Sarajevo, Skopje, and Zagreb, making resupply both hazardous and infrequent. Airdrops often drifted off target or landed in German-occupied zones. One notorious incident in October 1943 saw a full container of weapons fall directly into a Wehrmacht outpost near Kraljevo, an accident that forced the partisans to abandon an entire valley. Amid these operational difficulties, disappearances began to draw quiet concern within OSS headquarters. Patrols operating along the rugged Albanian coast near Vlora vanished without transmitting final coordinates. A 3-man mapping team working in the Sar Mountains ceased radio contact after reporting increased German movement along the Prizren-Tetovo corridor. Their last message reads, "Road congestion heavier than expected. Locals untrustworthy. Repositioning south." No further signals were ever received. The insight into the complexity of these missions emerges most clearly from internal communications decrypted long after the war. A memo from OSS Cairo dated November 1943 noted, "High probability that local loyalties shift daily, German intelligence exploiting rivalries between Chetniks and partisans." In effect, Allied teams were not just navigating enemy patrols, they were navigating a political labyrinth where even a friendly face might turn hostile overnight. Detachment 101 learned this the hard way when one of their field commanders, Lieutenant Thomas Baird, was reportedly betrayed by a local guide near Lake Ohrid. His capture was never confirmed by German records, leaving his ultimate fate a mystery. Yet the missions continued. The Allies needed rail assessments, ammunition counts, and high-resolution maps of Axis fortifications. They needed to know which bridges could support panzer movements and which valleys hid fuel depots. This intelligence directly influenced Allied bombing campaigns and diverted German forces away from Italy during critical months. Even when teams vanished, their earlier reports shaped strategic decisions. Occasionally, a reveal surfaced that hinted at deeper layers of secrecy. In early 1944, a decrypted German message referenced the capture of foreign saboteurs in Macedonia, describing equipment consistent with OSS radios and codebooks. Yet the Allies could not match these descriptions to any of their missing teams. There were simply no records of any such unit operating in that region at the time. Historians later speculated that these might have been ultra-black OSS detachments, unnumbered and undocumented, deployed for tasks so sensitive they bypassed standard channels entirely. Modern intelligence analysts studying these cases note that the Balkans were a proving ground for unconventional warfare tactics. Small teams, working independently for weeks or months, pioneered methods later used in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond: low-visibility infiltration, irregular force partnerships, and decentralized command. Their legacy remains profound, even when their names and missions do not. But for all their strategic value, the disappearances leave a lingering unease. Were the missing men victims of betrayal, ambush, or simply the unforgiving terrain? Why do German archives fail to account for so many? And why were certain OSS sets of records quietly withdrawn from public release in the late 1940s? As 1944 approached, the Anglo-American Shadow War extended far beyond the Balkans. A new frontier opened on the freezing waters of the North Sea, where the Allies targeted one of the Axis's most closely guarded projects. What happened next would become one of the most enigmatic maritime episodes of the entire conflict, an operation still riddled with gaps, conflicting testimonies, and missing logs. By early 1944, the frozen coastlines of Norway had become one of the most contested and secretive regions of the European theater. Public histories of the war often highlight the sabotage at Vemork and the destruction of heavy water facilities, but far fewer accounts mention a covert Anglo-American maritime mission that unfolded in the same shadowed arena. It was a mission so sensitive that even its departure logs remain partially redacted, and the surviving personnel spoke of it only in guarded fragments. What is known begins with a single entry in a Royal Navy report: submarine departed Lerwick, February 12, 1944. Special detachment embarked. Objective not recorded. The struggle of this mission began long before the vessel ever left port. The Allies were desperately trying to confirm rumors that the Germans were relocating components of their heavy water production, vital to their atomic research, along the Norwegian coast. Standard reconnaissance flights were too risky. German radar had been reinforced, and the Luftwaffe's northern fighter wings had grown more aggressive. Thus, a specialized team, part SOE, part OSS, was assembled to infiltrate the area and work with elements of the Norwegian resistance. The submarine tasked with delivering them was HMS Celian, a veteran of North Sea patrols, but now heavily modified with additional storage for equipment, collapsible canoes, and wireless sets wrapped in oil-treated canvas. On board were 8 operatives, 3 SOE specialists experienced in sabotage, 2 Norwegian exiles trained in coastal infiltration, and 3 OSS analysts whose role was to document any findings related to the suspected heavy water transfers. They carried no identifying documents, and their orders were issued orally by a senior British officer known only in the records as CW. The harsh North Sea crossing was the team's first test. Freezing spray coated the outer decks, and the submarine dove frequently to avoid detection by German patrol aircraft. Lieutenant James Rourke of the OSS later wrote in a private letter, "The sea was alive. Ice on every surface, men sick in their bunks, and the uncertainty of where exactly we were heading. Our training did not prepare us for the cold. It felt hostile, sentient." This sense of foreboding followed them throughout the mission. Upon reaching the remote fjord south of Trondheim, the operatives disembarked under moonless skies. Their landing point was a narrow strip of shoreline known to local fishermen but rarely patrolled. 2 of the Norwegian agents rowed ahead in a folding canoe to signal a safe approach. According to the submarine's log, the team returned a single hand light signal 3 flashes, indicating that the coast appeared clear. What happened over the next 48 hours is pieced together only from fragments: a Norwegian resistance courier's statement, incomplete British field notes, and one recovered radio message intercepted days later. The operatives moved inland and linked with members of the Milorg resistance, who reported unusual German shipments moving along night routes, crates loaded onto trucks under heavy guard, then transferred to coastal vessels. But the timing never aligned with their observation windows. For 2 days, the Anglo-American team shadowed these movements, attempting to determine whether the crates held heavy water cells or other scientific equipment. Then, abruptly, the records go silent. The next surviving document is a partial radio transmission, believed to be sent by the WWII wireless operator at approximately 3:20 hours on February 15, 1944. Only fragments were decipherable. Contact unexpected, return not possible, extraction compromised, logs incomplete. The key phrase, contact unexpected, has fueled decades of speculation. Historians disagree whether it referred to enemy troops, compromised resistance members, or an unplanned encounter with German naval personnel. No German records mention the capture of such a group that week, though naval patrols did report unusual activity near Hitra Island. The absence of matching German documentation remains one of the mission's great mysteries. At dawn on February 16th, the Celian returned to the rendezvous point to recover the operatives. The crew waited 7 hours, surfacing only when necessary and scanning the Trialine through thick fog. Not a single agent appeared. The submarine commander filed an understated but chilling entry: no signal, no movement. Party presumed unable to reach extraction. With German patrol boats increasing in number, he ordered a silent withdrawal to avoid compromising the larger Allied presence in the area. Insight into the aftermath comes from scattered Allied reports. One Milorg leader, interviewed years later, claimed he heard sustained gunfire near the extraction point the night before the submarine's arrival. Another recalled whispers of a German ambush triggered by a double agent infiltrating the resistance. Yet no bodies were recovered, and no equipment surfaced. It was as if the entire team vanished into the snowy fjords. For modern military analysts, the mission holds a valuable lesson. Even the best intelligence fails without reliable local networks, and in occupied Norway, loyalties were fractured by fear, survival, and relentless German counterintelligence pressure. The disappearance of the operatives underscores the fragility of covert warfare, how quickly a meticulously planned operation can unravel due to a single unknown variable. But the most unsettling aspect remains the incomplete logs. Pages appear removed or rewritten. The identities of 2 OSS members remain uncertain. And the submarine's deck log for the night of the attempted extraction is missing 3 crucial entries. These omissions set the stage for the next layer of wartime secrecy, one that moved from fjords and forests to the skies above Europe, where reconnaissance pilots flew missions so classified that even their aircraft were denied official existence. What happened in those skies would deepen the mystery surrounding Allied intelligence operations and lead to another disappearance that still defies explanation. By 1944, the war in Europe had become a race for information. Every rail yard, factory complex, and power plant within the German Reich was a potential target, but Allied commanders needed precise intelligence that satellites would one day provide, but which in 1944 could only be obtained by the men who flew deep into enemy airspace with cameras more valuable than bombs. These ultra-secret reconnaissance flights, conducted by RAF Photographic Reconnaissance Units, PRU, and select Yuzov detachments, operated under a veil so dense that many missions were never formally logged. Pilots flew unarmed, unescorted, and alone, depending entirely on altitude, speed, and luck. One such mission, launched in September 1944, would become one of the most unsettling disappearances of the Allied intelligence war. The struggle began at RAF Mount Farm in Oxfordshire, the nerve center of Britain's photo recon effort. It was here that the RAF's legendary blue-painted Spitfire PR variants, stripped of weapons, fitted with powerful cameras, and capable of flying above 30,000 feet, were stationed. Alongside them operated a small American detachment using modified P-35 F-38 Lightnings, the F-5 reconnaissance version. While many pilots were known by name, one crew assigned to a classified joint mission remains frustratingly obscure: Flight Lieutenant Arthur Delaney of the RAF and his USAF photographic officer, Technical Sergeant Charles Avery. Their assignment focused on Silesia, an industrial region crucial to the German war machine. Intelligence analysts at Medmenham had detected unusual rail activity feeding into chemical plants near the town of Blechhammer. These plants, targeted repeatedly by Allied bombers, had proven resilient. Something about their reconstruction patterns suggested concealed infrastructure, possibly underground facilities or camouflaged fuel lines. Delaney and Avery were selected to confirm this. Their aircraft, a specially equipped Spitfire PR Mk-11, carried a prototype long-range mapping camera whose existence was so sensitive that technicians worked behind curtain partitions to install it. The morning of September 12, 1944 was clear but cold. According to the limited surviving records, Delaney took off just after 0500 hours. His flight plan involved a high-altitude transit over the North Sea, a sweep across Denmark, then a deep arc into Silesia before turning southwest toward Allied lines in Italy. It was a flight of nearly 2,000 miles, pushing the limits of the aircraft's endurance. Ground personnel later recalled Delaney's final words before departure: "If the winds hold, we'll be back before dusk." No one ever saw him or Sergeant Avery again. Insight into what happened next comes from the intelligence summaries prepared in the weeks following the mission. At 9:13 hours, Delaney's Spitfire was detected by a chain-home low radar station over the Kattegat, on schedule and at the expected altitude. After that, no Allied radar made positive contact. Yet German Luftwaffe listening posts in northern Germany recorded unusual radio traffic around midday. One report mentions a fast, high-flying aircraft heading southeast, pursued by 2 interceptors. Another, discovered decades later, refers cryptically to a reconnaissance machine equipped with unknown apparatus. None of these reports perfectly match Delaney's flight profile, but they're the only clues. The reveal came when Allied analysts reviewed aerial reconnaissance taken hours before and after Delaney's expected arrival near Blechhammer. A Luftwaffe patrol was photographed circling west of the target area at precisely the time Delaney should have been overhead. But no wreckage was ever found. No German unit claimed a shoot-down. And, most tellingly, no crash site was located after the war, despite extensive Allied and Polish surveys. The absence of physical evidence left investigators baffled. If the aircraft had been lost over the North Sea, debris should have washed ashore. If shot down over Germany or Poland, the wreck would have been catalogued by Allied recovery teams in the post-war years. Instead, Delaney's Spitfire simply disappeared. This silence in the record has led some historians to suspect the mission may have involved more than reconnaissance. Avery's presence, an American photographic officer flying aboard a British aircraft, was highly unusual. The experimental camera they carried remains poorly documented, with hints that it could capture near-infrared imaging meant to detect underground structures. Was the mission targeting something beyond the chemical plants themselves? A chilling footnote appears in a post-war debriefing from a German signals officer who served near Opala. He claimed that in September 1944, his unit intercepted a strange transmission in English, breaking altitude, attempting southward turn. The signal ended abruptly. Whether this was Delaney's final message cannot be proven. Modern analysts see the disappearance as a cautionary tale about the limits of intelligence collection under extreme conditions. High-altitude reconnaissance offered unmatched insight into German industry, but the cost was immense: solo flights over hundreds of miles of hostile territory with no margin for error. Delaney and Avery's loss became a silent reminder to Allied planners that even the most advanced reconnaissance methods could vanish without a trace. The unanswered questions surrounding this mission, what the prototype camera captured, whether it contributed to the disappearance, why German archives record no interception, remain unresolved. And yet this was not the last time Allied operatives vanished during a mission tied to a looming German offensive. As the autumn of 1944 turned into winter, the Allies prepared for what they believed would be the final push into the heart of Europe. They were wrong. A massive German counterattack was brewing in the Ardennes, and a joint S.L.I. OSS infiltration team was already deep inside the forests, sending back reports that would stop abruptly just days before the first German tanks rolled forward. By late 1944, the Allied advance across Western Europe appeared steady, almost unstoppable. Paris had been liberated in August, Brussels soon after, and American armored divisions pushed toward the German border. On paper, victories seemed inevitable. But deep within the Ardennes, a region of dense forests, narrow valleys, and unpredictable winter storms, something far more ominous was underway. Ultra intercepts revealed fragments of German radio silence, unusual fuel convoys, and movement among elite panzer divisions. The clues were troubling, but incomplete. To fill the gaps, a covert Anglo-American infiltration team was deployed, an SOE, OSS Joint Task Group whose purpose was never recorded in official orders. Their story would become one of the war's lesser-known disappearances. The struggle facing this team began the moment they stepped across the Schnee-Eifel Ridge in early December 1944. Unlike typical reconnaissance units, they wore no insignias, carried forged papers, and operated with rules of engagement that offered little protection if captured. Their objective was strategically simple yet operationally perilous: verify whether the Germans were secretly massing forces for a winter counteroffensive. Allied commanders doubted such a possibility. Hitler lacked fuel, manpower, and time. Yet scattered intelligence suggested the opposite. Something was happening in the woods, and it demanded human confirmation. The task group consisted of 6 members: 3 OSS reconnaissance specialists, 2 SOE field operators, and 1 Belgian liaison familiar with the local resistance networks. Their insertion point lay near the town of Clairvaux, slipping through forest trails under cover of fog. They carried compact radios, strip maps, demolition charges for emergency escape, and a camera rig modified to operate silently in low light. A diary found after the war, believed to belong to OSS Sergeant Henry Wolfe, captured the mood of the mission. This forest feels wrong. Too quiet. Civilians whisper of trucks at night, but no one sees them. Their struggle intensified as they moved deeper into German territory. The Ardennes in winter was a labyrinth: thick pines, frozen streams, and valleys where fog clung for days. Every sound carried. German patrols, often wearing snow camouflage, materialized seemingly out of nowhere. The team avoided contact by staying off roads and sleeping in barns or hunters' cabins, relying on sympathetic locals whose loyalty had been shaped as much by fear as by patriotism. Their radio operator, SOE Corporal Michael Harding, transmitted each night at scheduled intervals, sending coded updates about road traffic, hidden fuel depots, and suspicious troop concentrations. Insight into their findings appears in a fragmented OSS summary written months later. One signal on December 12th described armored treads heard in valleys east of Hosingen and fuel drums concealed beneath timber stacks. Another message reported the movement of artillery units at night, concealed from Allied aerial reconnaissance by strict light discipline. These details contradicted official expectations. American commanders believed the Germans incapable of massing heavy equipment without detection. Yet the reports kept coming, each one more alarming. The reveal came with their final transmission on December 14th. Harding's coded message, intercepted at an Allied station in Luxembourg, read, "Significant buildup confirmed stop numbers greater than previous estimates. Stop movement synchronized along north-south corridors. Stop unclear if assault imminent. Stop attempting further observation." Then came an unusual final line. "Secondary signals compromise. Stop will reposition west." Analysts later noted that this phrasing suggested detection or jamming, something that rarely occurred inside the Ardennes at the time. What happened next is one of the enduring mysteries of the prelude to the Battle of the Bulge. The team stopped transmitting. No further messages reached Allied command. Attempts to contact them through prearranged channels failed. When American forces swept through the area after the German offensive began on December 16th, they identified several cabins and hide sites that matched the team's known movement pattern. All were abandoned, beds still warm in one barn, boot prints in melted snow near another. But there were no bodies, no equipment, and no signs of struggle. In the decades that followed, historians pieced together partial clues. A Belgian farmer claimed he saw German troops escorting men in civilian clothing toward a truck on the morning of December 15th. Another local reported hearing gunfire that same night in the forest near Wiltz, but snowstorms erased any physical trace. German records from the region are frustratingly incomplete, many destroyed during the chaos of the Bulge. No Wehrmacht unit officially reported capturing an Allied infiltration team. No prisoner manifests matched the names of the 6 operatives. Modern analysts who study the disappearance argue that the team's intelligence should have triggered a more forceful Allied response. Instead, their final warnings arrived too late and too fragmented to overcome preconceived assumptions. When the German offensive erupted, panzer columns emerging from the very valleys the team had scouted, American units were caught by surprise. The Covert Task Group, if still alive that day, would have been engulfed in the opening hours of the attack. Yet the most puzzling artifact remains a partially burned notebook discovered in 1946 inside a forest bunker near St. Vith. Believed to belong to Sergeant Wolfe, it contains a single intact sentence: "We saw more than we could report." What exactly they witnessed, what movement, what preparations, what secret German activity, remains unknown. As the war neared its end, the Allied intelligence services shifted focus to a final race, locating German scientific archives, research facilities, and personnel before the Soviets reached them. It would lead to one last shadow mission, one involving captures, vanished documents, and an absence of records so complete that some historians argue the truth was intentionally buried. By the spring of 1945, the European war was collapsing into chaos. Entire German divisions surrendered overnight, cities fell before Allied units even reached their outskirts, and government ministries burned documents faster than soldiers could stack them. Yet amid the confusion, a darker, more calculated struggle began, an intelligence race between the Allies and the Soviet Union to secure Germany's scientific archives, high-ranking specialists, and clandestine research. Operation Alsos is well documented today, but behind its official history lay smaller, unsanctioned missions conducted by Anglo-American teams whose existence was never fully acknowledged. One such mission, its records fragmentary, its outcome uncertain, became the final and most enigmatic entry in the series of wartime disappearances. The struggle began in mid-April 1945, as the U.S. 7th Army pushed through southern Germany. Intelligence chatter suggested that elements of the Reich Research Council were relocating sensitive materials, blueprints, experimental apparatus, and personnel tied to advanced weapons programs, from bombed-out cities to remote Alpine redoubts. The Allies feared that these materials might be destroyed, hidden, or captured by Soviet forces sweeping in from the east. To prevent this, a joint British-American detachment, composed of members from OSS-X, 2 counterintelligence and SWI scientific intelligence specialists, was assembled under extreme secrecy. They operated without uniforms, under civilian cover, and with orders that emphasized quiet retrieval over confrontation. Their objective centered on a set of rumored archives stored somewhere in the foothills between Garmisch-Partenkirchen and the Austrian border. These archives were said to include research on chemical processes, jet propulsion designs, and correspondence between high-level German scientists, material that, if preserved, could accelerate Allied scientific understanding by years. A captured German engineer mentioned transit caches manned by SS technical officers. Another informant described seeing crates loaded onto trucks leaving Munich in the last days of the city's defense. These leads converged on a narrow valley guarded by a handful of SS security units still refusing to surrender. The infiltration team, 8 men in total, moved under cover of night, passing through pockets of resistance and streams of refugees. Their equipment included silenced pistols, a short-range wireless set, and a portable cipher pad. One operator, identified in fragmentary archives only as LH, kept a field journal describing their passage: roads clogged, houses burning, locals divided between despair and fury, German soldiers shedding uniforms like snakeskin. But the most unsettling observation concerned their destination: Villagers speak of SS trucks heading to the mountains. None return. Insight into what transpired comes largely from Alsos mission summaries and scattered intelligence logs. On April 22nd, the infiltration team transmitted its first coded message. Archive trail confirmed stop resistance, nominal stop, locals intimidated by SS patrols, stop, continue tracking to valley route. 2 days later, a second transmission announced that the team had located a facility concealed in a ravine, a concrete structure, camouflaged, lightly guarded but likely wired for demolition. The Allies had encountered similar last-ditch facilities designed to destroy data rather than let it fall into enemy hands. The team was ordered to seize the materials intact if possible, and to prevent their destruction at all costs. The reveal came with their final message on April 25th. It was shorter than previous transmissions and contained an unusual sense of urgency. Interior access achieved, stop documents, partly removed, stop evidence of Soviet agents, in vicinity, stop possible compromise, stop attempting extraction with priority crates. No additional transmissions followed. Ground forces sweeping the region days later found the ravine facility partially destroyed, roof collapsed, crates burned, papers scattered by explosives and fire. But there was no sign of the team, their equipment, or the crates they claimed to have secured. Post-war investigations only deepened the mystery. A patrol from the U.S. 10th Armored Division reported seeing tire tracks leading into a forest road that abruptly ended in a landslide area, consistent with demolition charges or artillery fire. Local residents recalled hearing detonations the night of the 25th, followed by truck engines and shouting in German. One elderly witness described seeing men in civilian clothes forced onto a flatbed truck by SS troops, though his testimony varied each time he gave it. No bodies matching the team's descriptions were ever found. Even more perplexing is the absence of German documentation. SS units in the region either surrendered days later or disappeared into the mountains. Their records, such as they were, contained no mention of captured Allied operatives. Soviet archives provide no clarity. The few relevant documents remain classified or redacted. This vacuum of evidence has led some historians to suggest that the team may have been caught in crossfire between retreating SS units and advancing Soviet scouts. Others propose that the operatives were killed during an attempt to protect the documents, their remains lost amid the destruction. Yet a final, haunting clue surfaced in 1963 when a British archivist uncovered an unsigned report misfiled in an SOE personnel folder. It referenced valuable scientific materials retrieved at great cost by unnamed field team, Southern Germany, April 1945. The phrasing implies that at least part of the operation succeeded, that some crates made it out, even if the men did not. Modern intelligence scholars view this mission as symbolic of wartime secrecy at its most human level, courageous operatives working without recognition, risking everything in a landscape collapsing into disordered violence. Their disappearance underscores how easily lives and truths can be buried amid the smoke of a dying regime. With the war ending and Europe reshaping itself, these lost operatives became silent footnotes in the classified history of Allied intelligence. Their names rarely appear in public documents. Their work remains half-hidden behind redactions, and the exact contents of the crates they sought may never be known. But their final transmissions, urgent, fragmented, and unresolved, close the chapter on the 5 most secret Allied operations of World War II that were never fully declassified.